event really where we've been able to present our work to a group. This might be one of the only events where both David, Josh, and I are all going to be here together. And so we're really excited to bring this to you. We had a lot of fun with this project. It's been really eye-opening. It was an opportunity to tell the story of the district through the lens of natural resources. And we found that that's resonated with a lot of people. And we've been able to develop some tools that I think could set each of you on your own journey of discovery, whether it be for the purpose that we created this for or for something entirely different. So what we're going to do tonight is I have some presentation prepared. David, Josh, and I are all going to contribute to that. Some of it is static through a slideshow. Some of it we're actually going to look at the final product that we delivered, which is a website. And right off the bat, we're going to make sure that we share that link in the comments of this presentation. And when we're done, I really hope that you all do set aside some time to explore and check out the website. We built it for you, and we hope you like it. So let me dive right in. So who are we? Christine did give a brief introduction, but my name is Joe. I work for a consulting firm called Strawn Environmental. My role here is as an engineer and ecologist. My job is primarily oriented around restoring streams, wetlands, and shorelines in support of water quality goals for the Chesapeake Bay. That affords me the opportunity to collaborate with a lot of people and a lot of our local municipalities. I am thrilled to be joined by Mr. David Ramos. David is a professor at American University in graphic design, and he also has among the most unique experience locally with the historical landscape, especially as it relates to waterways in the district. Finally, I'd like to welcome Josh Birch. Josh is our counterpart on the government side. He was the project manager for this project with the DC, the District Department of Energy and Environment. So just to give you an outline of what we're going to talk about today, Josh is going to share some background on what led this project to be conceived. I'm going to go over how we constructed a map of the historical stream network, what tools we used and how we made that happen. David's going to give some perspective on some of the waterways surrounding Capitol Hill, some of the interesting nuggets that we uncovered as part of this study. To spoil the ending a little bit, one of our big conclusions is that there are a lot less waterways than there used to be on the landscape here in DC. I'm going to explain why and where did they go? Why did we do that? What does that mean? And what are we doing about it? And then finally, we'll close with Josh sharing some next steps and opportunities. So let's get right off to it. Josh, why don't you go ahead and share the project background?
Yeah, thanks, Joe and David, for all your work on this project. And thanks to everyone for joining tonight. It's great to see such a large turnout. As Joe mentioned, he neglected to say that my real role is as a mid-level government bureaucrat facilitating this project, which sounds really exciting. But most of my day job is I work in Ward 7 and 8, so east of the Anacostia River. I know Ward 7's moving over west of the river more and more in this new redistricting. But I work on the eastern side of the Anacostia River, looking at our streams and figuring out how we can fix them up so that they can be stable and healthy in the modern urban conditions with which they exist. And then a few years ago, Councilmember Che gave DOEE a direct appropriation and earmark that wanted to figure out a way to look at and explore all the buried streams around the district. And there was no way we were going to be able to look at every buried stream because development had happened in the past and not every single pipe was marked. And as we moved landforms around to develop neighborhoods, that changed how water flows both above ground and below ground. So we couldn't necessarily, with the money that we had, do everything. But we did put out a competitive grant proposal that Strawn Environmental, where Joe works, had the best proposal, so we awarded it to them to look at historically where streams were in the district see how many of them that we could sort of keep track of and find out where they are, where they might be currently in a pipe, if we can find that out. Figure out how we can educate the public about it. So what cool ways can we give residents like you all, like me, like my children, ways to access this information that previously wasn't really accessible to residents unless you wanted to really dig, which is what Joe and his team had to do. And then to think about what potential can we reach? We have a lot of buried streams. Some of them, it's just impossible. We are not going to daylight them. We're not going to move large buildings or neighborhoods out so that we could daylight a stream. But where are the opportunities for us to bring that water back up to the surface? And that's sort of where we'll close tonight, because that's like, it's really exciting potential for what we can do, because it's not just, you know, yes, it's cool, but it's also about how can we help fix some of the things that we've done in the past that aren't so good for the environment. You know, when streams are in pipes, that water is just conveyed really fast out of a neighborhood, out of a city, into the downstream receiving water body, whether it's the Potomac River, the Anacostia, or Rock Creek. And by bringing those streams out of those pipes, we can help improve the environment. We can help filter that water. We can help provide plants and trees that grow along that newly daylit stream that probably wouldn't be able to grow there before because the hydrology was different if the stream was in a pipe. And we can control erosion. And when we bring these streams back up, what else can we bring back? Can we bring back fish? Can we bring back birds that previously wouldn't be in those areas? And those are all some of the things that we aim for. It is hard in an urban environment, but that's sort of what we do at Department of Energy and Environment. And this project sort of has helped present a roadmap for some really good opportunities to take streams out of pipes and bring them back up to the surface. So not just humans can enjoy them, but so that we can help clean up our waterways and we can increase biodiversity in the district.
Okay, thank you, Josh. So that sets the stage for our work. Certainly the stakes are high. We had our work cut out for us on what we wanted to achieve. And we felt that the best place to start was, how do we understand what's changed and what we've lost? And so our team began with a mapping project. So what does that look like? Well, the Library of Congress, among other sources, have unbelievable records of historic mapping everywhere in the country, but particularly here in the district. We went and we sorted through it, and we found 9 maps covering a span of 200 years or so, a little more than that. And of course, we know what it looks like now in the present day. And so what we did is we took these, the Library of Congress has done high resolution scans of all of these. So we've got these incredibly detailed representations of these maps. For example, this map that you're looking at right here, you can see Capitol Hill is right here in the center of our screen, is from 1886, shortly after the Civil War, by A.J. Johnson. And each map looks a little different. They're all completely different levels of details. None of these mappers set out to draw a map of the stream network, which is my goal today. A lot of them wanted to represent the city, or maybe a neighborhood or a portion of the city. So what we did with each of these maps is we tried to find the best ones that showed streams coming through DC. And we took each map and we twisted it and we moved it into a geographic software to put it on top of modern day DC, reference where it is. And I enlisted as many of my junior staff as I could to go through and actually hand trace every single stream line that was shown on any map. And before you think that that was unfair of me to them, realize I had to check hundreds and hundreds of these lines myself after they had the privilege of drawing them. And it ends up looking something like this. So this map is from 1793. It's Ellicott's map. And you can see some things look really familiar. We've got the Potomac River flowing through the center of the screen. Here's where Roosevelt Island is today. It's labeled Eastern Branch, but this is one of the first maps that shows the name Anacostia, which is the modern day name for the Anacostia River. Perhaps most importantly is, Capitol Hill is right over here. There's a large stream network running right through the center of the city. I think a lot of you have probably heard the name Tiber Creek or the Tiber watershed. the story of the district is completely intertwined with the Tiber. At this time, it was probably called Goose Creek, actually. So we digitized each and all of these maps and we combined them because, as I said, every map had a different level of detail. Some mapped larger systems, some mapped smaller systems. One map in particular that David is going to show a little later is incredibly complete from 1861. But we knew that if they made it to a map drawn and measured with link and chain at this time, these were significant bodies of water. These weren't little mud puddles. These were flowing systems worthy of such treatment. So this should look familiar. This is the district in modern day. So to get you oriented from above, this strip of green right here is the National Mall downtown. This circle here is RFK Stadium, and here's Nats Park down here. This large green area is Rock Creek. One of the few areas in our study that remains relatively true to the way it looked when the settlers arrived. And this gray splotch is downtown DC, which isn't surprising. It is a modern city. It's highly developed. It's got a lot of pavement and impervious buildings. And so this is the denser part of the city here. So as I said before, what we did is we went through all of these maps and gathered as much data as we could. And we thought, well, what does this look like? Okay, it looks something like this. So let's just take a moment to kind of admire that. You know, this is a living, breathing landscape. DC has fundamentally wonderful soil. It was a community of springs and seeps and flowing water and wetlands, highly interconnected. Every low spot in the city had flowing water in it at one point or another. And so this is where my team went back to the drawing board and we said, okay, this is what it was. We did our best to combine these sources and come up with a realistic representation of what was there. And so we used data from USGS and DOEE and looked at the modern day pipe network. And we got into our aerial photos and we zoomed in real tight and we tried to decide, okay, well, what's not there anymore of these? If we were to mark them as still relatively close to where they were in the late 1700s to today, what would be missing? Everything in yellow that you see on your screen is gone. And we're going to explain why that is, but I think it's just relevant to sort of assess that impact. So if I remove the yellow lines from the screen, it looks like that. This is just a much less wet city. It's a completely different picture of how things were. The largest gap being right through the city center in the former Tiber watershed coming through the city. You can also see that really almost anywhere that's still green from above still has life and water flowing through it. These are the areas that are preserved today. But one other thing I want you to look at is I've turned off the rivers here. So if you focus on the Potomac River and the Anacostia River here, my next slide is going to turn that old stream network back on. And I just want you to focus on how much narrower these systems are today than how they were. So ready? 1, 2, 3. It's pretty dramatic. It really is nearly double the width in a lot of areas. It's well known that the Anacostia, for example, was navigable and took shipments by boats near the settlement times, all the way up to Bladensburg, Maryland, which is off our detailed map. It's up here, something that's hard to imagine today with the configuration of the Anacostia. So again, focus on these big bodies of water. The Anacostia and the Potomac will go right back to today. And you can see that to facilitate development, the streams have been narrowed, channelized deeply, wetlands filled. In fact, these are seawalls along Anacostia Park and the Anacostia, none of which, by the way, is inconsistent at all with cities around the world and within the country at the time. This was the modern standard of engineering. And there are a lot of good reasons to do the things that we did. So what's our conclusion? Well, since 1792, approximately 70% of the length of stream has disappeared from the landscape in the district, and all of the values that went with it. A lot of these streams were associated with robust wetlands, which, as Josh pointed out, are some of the most ecologically valuable landscapes on Earth. And so we live in a much different city than we did. And so we put in a lot of effort to find this information and process it and make it available. So let's talk about, well, okay, what can I do with this? How do I see this? What if I want to learn more about like where I live and my street? And so I'm going to pivot here for a moment and come to our website, and just show you a little bit of the functionality in case you'd like to visit in the future. So this is our welcome page, and we divide our study into two parts, streams from the past and streams from the future. What I've just presented to you is really the conclusion of our streams from the past effort. And what we've done here is we've created this website that is loaded up with historical references, information about the founding of DC. And we loaded these maps in, and we created basically a virtual tour that you can take yourself. And we've included artwork, representations of the city consistent with the time of each map. And so what's really special about this is, you know, you can see as my screen, as I scroll down, it's shooting you through the city. And I'll choose this map as an example. Is right in the lower right-hand corner of the screen is a little zoom button. We've made these maps explorable to you. So you can click, you can drag, you can come see Capitol Hill and see what the best map in 1861 looked like surrounding this area. And it's amazing. You can see, you know, right after the Civil War, there were still canals running right alongside the National Mall. And David, I hope that you'll talk about that a little bit, not to tease too much on what's coming up next. So again, we'd invite you to come look at the story, look at some of the photos and images of people and landscapes that we found. You know, photography has been around a long time, and we found all kinds of newspaper clippings and interesting information about how this landscape changed. The other thing that I want you to see, and I apologize for rushing through the website piece here, is we have a map down here. I'll wait for it to load, that is similar to the data I just showed you. It shows the original, and I might have to refresh this page. So let me go ahead and do that. It shows the original stream network on an aerial photo today. And includes a slider that will allow you to reveal and take away the different streams and explore each. So let me give it one more second here and see if it comes through. This is not uncommon when we're live. Well, while that's loading, I'll show you one other thing. Beneath this map is a link to a web map. Let's say you want to see these streams and explore even more. It'll take you to this application here, which allows you to turn on these different layers and see all of the different streams that we delineated. And if you want to type in your address, let's just pick a random address in DC. You can navigate to it and you can see all of these different sources and where we map streams that were shown on that map. So you can explore your neighborhood, you can explore your neighbor's neighborhood, and you can see all of the data. We wanted to make it available to you for whatever purpose. I do have to give a disclaimer. Just because it was there doesn't mean it is there. That's actually a big conclusion of what we have here. So just because there's a stream running along your street doesn't necessarily correlate to flooding issues or water in your basement. There's maybe other things going on as well. But it is a piece of the puzzle. It's a relevant piece of information that we want people to have access to so that they can see how things have changed and maybe why your neighborhood looks the way it does, and why the drains are where they are, and what's going on. Oh, good. Okay, so I'm coming back to this map here. I did want to showcase this. This is our slider feature, which allows you to sort of reveal and take away the different stream network from our modern times to the past. And likewise, you can zoom in and quickly overlay and remove the different features here. Okay, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn the show over to my colleague David, and David is going to share a little bit more information on a historical perspective. Okay.
Well, hi folks, you can hear me okay? Wonderful, thanks. It's the refrain of our time. It's been a rare opportunity to work on this project. It's been a joy because it's this chance to take some historic mystery, really, a mystery, and dig into that mystery and share what we've found in a way that just might help inform the future. And that's special. It's not often you get to do that. I'm here to give you a picture of the past. But Joe talked earlier about how he had a lot of a junior staff at Strawn digitizing all the streams across these 9 maps that formed the key to the later project. And it's been an odd project because it involves so many hands. There's people at Strawn, at DOEE, and then there's a lot of people involved in this project who never really knew that they would be and never maybe intended it. That's the people who drew those maps that we're basing all this work on. And we couldn't have done it without that record. And we've got their maps, we've got their data, but what we don't have is their subjective experience, a sense of what this place was like. And we can never fully get that. We can try and get it back. And what I'm going to try and do now is that if Joe's given you a background about how the project came to be, and we have, Josh has explained the purpose of the project, well, I want to try and give you that subjective understanding of where the stream network comes from, and maybe what it might, something about what it might become. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Let's just turn this on. Hang on a moment. Okay. You can probably see. You got my screen?
Looks good.
Wonderful. I just love this picture. It's the Lincoln Memorial. It's the Lincoln Memorial about 1917, which is one of the images we dug out of the Library of Congress. And it's a special photo because it's the Lincoln Memorial before the reflecting pool was a reflecting pool. That's all emergent plants in the foreground and a little bit of rank grass. The story here is that DC has been a wetter place, a much wetter place than it is today. And it's through a very hefty amount of engineering that we've ended up with a city that we all know. This is the Anacostia, just off the boathouses and southeast of Capitol Hill. It's an Army Corps of Engineer dredge changing the course of that river. But DC is also an upland. It's also an upland environment. There's the big area of coastal plain, low-lying, and then we've got the hills. You all know this. You're on Capitol Hill. It's a pretty big hill to go up. Yeah, there's an escarpment that marks the side of the city. And from maybe about 1820 or so, we would be seeing a landscape that's increasingly open, full of farms, not yet suburbs, but a hilly landscape drained by streams. This is an early record of what the city was like. It's a little bit on the poetic side, but it seems pretty clear here that DC's got great water, which serves public purposes. It serves to carry away waste. Upstream, it serves to provide drinking water. And it survives, this stream network survives well into the 20th century, at least in some parts of the city. There's a wonderful collection of cards, photographic cards over at DCPL. This is on the east side of the Anacostia, and we've got a group of wonderfully formally dressed people scrambling somehow over a fallen tree. But incredible to imagine that you'd find a place like this in DC, but this is just over 100 years ago. You can come across stories of how there were swimming holes in Tiber Creek in Washington, where kids could get their heads underwater. This is probably about, I really think it's about 1900. I think it's a fan trip with a horse-drawn streetcar. But this is Rock Creek, just beside Georgetown. Look at the banks of this. There's willow trees next to the river. There's clearly a floodplain that still gets washed onto, and when the stream rises, there's space for the stream to expand, and there's all of this vegetation, and people are sitting there enjoying it. The maps we have are all very unique. They each give us one kind of insight into the city. This one is an 1861 map. It's probably the best early map we've got. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit onto data that we've digitized off of it. I'm going to take you on a quick tour of a few of the major streams around the district. You know the Anacostia, you know Potomac, you know Rock Creek. Earlier, we talked about Tiber. It used to be Goose Creek, but DC, with its hearkenings after ancient Rome, somebody figured we should call it the Tiber. And the Tiber drained past Capitol Hill, and then it flowed north. It turned north, it came from the north, past Union Station, and it reached its headwaters right under, in a spring, Smith Spring, right under where McMillan Reservoir is today. That spring, it actually fed a pipe that ran down to the Capitol, and for a long time provided the Capitol with its drinking water. This is the Tiber Valley, just north of what's Union Station right now, 1840, so that's the B&O Railroad. We've got a stream flowing under the railroad line through this little tidy looking bridge with two arches. I think the cattle are kind of fanciful, but we can excuse the artist that. The streams, we've always tried to regulate what happens with streams, and the city at one point started passing laws forbidding you from swimming in a stream. But the Tiber didn't go all the way to the Potomac. Its mouth very quickly, well, not very quickly, but its mouth became a canal, the Washington City Canal, never a very successful thing. Here's an 1863 photo taken from, has to be the Capitol building, looking across what is now the National Mall. You can see the site of the Smithsonian Museums and the U.S. Botanic Garden. The light area on the far right side of the photograph is the canal. That's the Washington City Canal. It existed as a route, as a shortcut for small boats to get from Potomac to the Anacostia around the Navy Yard. And honestly, I'm not really sure that it was ever going to succeed because it suffered from being silted up constantly. It ran through low-lying ground. This is the west end of the canal in an early map drawn by Benjamin Latrobe. Everything green you see on here is marshland. Remember, the Tiber, one of the big streams for DC, is draining right through this canal, draining into the Potomac, and it's bringing with it all of the waste and sediment that's washing down from the rest of the city. So the history of this canal was one of battling sediment and battling all of the unpleasant stuff that comes down with that sediment. Canal becomes a sewer. It becomes a de facto sewer, and it's arched over by 1870. This is a map from an 1870 report. You can see where if you look in the center, there's a dark area. That's the National Mall. That's the gardens that were on the mall. And there's just the outline of the low-lying area where the river used to emerge. And you can just see the red, which is all of the sewers, new constructed sewers draining the city. Mouth of the canal eventually had a tide gate so that to keep the tide water from backing up into the canal. There's still structures under that part of the city. This is a photo by Kim Bender over at Hoyrick House, and she just happened to catch construction work that momentarily unearthed part of the sewer. But what about Capitol Hill? Capitol Hill on this map is in the lower right. It's the summary of streams we've got here is based very heavily on that 1861 map. We don't have a precise record before 1861. And Capitol Hill, well, Capitol Hill's been a developed area for much longer than 1861. You can see the traces of streams working their way up from the Anacostia into the sides of the upland areas of the Capitol. There's a USGS, U.S. Geological Survey geologist, about 1970, who wrote a paper about the streams and springs of Washington, D.C. And he went through hundreds of years of newspaper records to try and dig up every mention of a spring he could find. Garnet P. Williams was his name. And he found about 7 springs that flowed on Capitol Hill. Most of them are at the base of hillsides. Most of them seem to have had some value in providing drinking water to their neighbors, at least until they dried up or became too contaminated to use. And most of them would have been feeding small streams. Let's go a little bit west. Go a little bit west of Capitol Hill, a little bit west of the ballpark, and you end up in an area around what was James Creek. On the map you see here, James Creek is center bottom. It used to be a very small tidal stream, which drained the southwestern portion of Capitol Hill. And by about 1870, 1880, this stream gets rebuilt into a canal with hard sides and hard edges. You're looking at that sewer map again. This is 1890. This is the DC government, the district's territorial government, being very pleased with itself for successfully constructing a sewer network. And remember, the city of 1890 doesn't have a safe, effective way to remove wastewater. I mean, imagine a city that doesn't have an effective sewer system. The place is going to be racked by public health problems. And in the late 19th century, DC, along with most of the world's cities, most of the world European and North American cities, starts to build sewers. DC's sewers mostly follow the routes of streams. They start to enclose streams. Well, I think we'll talk more about this later today. And they carry both runoff from rain and sanitary sewage. Just to drive the point home that there's sewage coming out of these sewers, the folks who made this map put these lovely little black ink blotches on here to mark each of the outfalls. So you can see how effective those sewers are at removing the waste. James Creek is running straight up the middle of the map we've got here. That's James Creek there. The blue areas are lower in elevation. The red is the line of one of the major sewers, a major sewer actually that captured Tiber Creek and is still flowing today. Now that sewer it's a big brick arched sewer. It runs mostly under North Capitol Street, north of the Capitol. It's 20 feet wide, specks I see are about 10 feet high. So it's draining a vast area of the city, and it's turned 90 degrees from its previous mouth so that it drains into James Creek and the Anacostia. So James Creek has gone from being this slow-flowing, quiet, placid tidal backwater into being one of the major outfalls for the city's sewage. It's also got practical value. It's also a canal that serves as a place for coastal shipping, bringing things like cargoes like lumber and gravel, all of the city's needs, a lot like what's has been down in that part of town until very recently. It's an unhappy kind of an ending for James Creek. This is a newspaper story from 1902. The headline is just amazing. It's "Tragedy and Disease Revel in James Creek Canal." And you've got some photographs here of the poor canal and its setting that brings tragedy and disease. Got a coastal schooner making its way up the canal, fine. But there's also a gas holder, there's straight sides, and the text is what gets really alarming. We're talking about what had been a natural creek is now this, quote, foul stream of death flowing through a populous section of the city. And I'm just astounded by this. According to this article, on average, one person a month was drowning in James Creek because people would fall in. What I've read, it's often late at night, sometimes people who are a bit intoxicated. People fall into the stream and can't get out because of those steep sides. So this ends up being a terrifying kind of a place. But I also want to offer this image. This is an undated image by Delancey Gill, who's we've relied on in this project for the story of Washington, because he gives us some insight from the period that we couldn't get in photographs. He gives us color, he gives us vegetation, and he gives us this, I got the sense that the man truly loved the everyday landscape he was in. And this is his view of James Creek, the James Creek Canal. And back there, you can see the Capitol building. We've got just right by the Capitol building, the hint of a thriving waterway that today maybe could have been a cleaner waterway that we wouldn't be dumping sewage into it anymore. And you can solve a problem like steep-sided banks. This gives me the idea that maybe there was another future possible. James Creek ends up being filled in about 1915, largely in part because of that public hazard, but also, I suspect, just to allow more development down in that part of town. All of these things show, all of the maps we have, as Joe demonstrated earlier, they all show up on the website, and you can look at them in more detail. But I do want to take you through that Boschke map and trace where the Tiber went. So this is that Boschke map, the 1861 map, the first really detailed map whose depiction of this, whose record of waterways we trust. James Creek is on here. It's shown as a wetland. The Washington City Canal shows up on here as well, along with the very complicated entrance around 17th Street Wharf. And there's the Tiber, making its way up past the Capitol building, past the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad line, and all the way up to the eventual site of McMillan Reservoir, where there's that spring where that fed the Capitol and fed the entire Tiber Creek network. Well, it's been. I hope that's been a good view of what we assembled here. Take a look at the site. There's far more photographs. You can find your neighborhood. You can trace streams on the other part of the city, and I'll let Joe bring the story forward, maybe about 100 years.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So I will retake control. I want to, that was fantastic. I will roll through a little bit more material because I suspect there might be a question or two that we would love to, and we'd love to have some discussion with you all. And David got to explaining many of these facts as well. So I'll just provide some more context on sort of where do we go from here and kind of what happened. So let's start with where did the streams go? I love this photo. This is along an outfall directly into Rock Creek. Have you ever made a pipe out of squares? This is a very old pipe made out of brick, and that type of thing is not super uncommon. And this pipe flows every day, which is the type of thing that got us kind of excited with this project. So first, I will try to keep it brief, but I did want to kind of talk about like, why do streams flow? You know, where does the water come from? You know, I think there's like this mythology that you know, we've got snow-capped mountains that as they melt every spring, they feed our springs, but obviously we don't have that here in the district. Or that, you know, you might tap a rock and flow emerges and it all starts at one point and flows down. And it's a little less exciting, but not entirely too complicated. Basically, streams are an expression of our landscape's ability to hold and slowly release water. Streams are a representation of groundwater flowing out of the landscape. So the water cycle, let's talk about it for just a minute. What happens in a normal landscape is that rain falls onto the ground, and from there it infiltrates. Some of it runs off, but some of it infiltrates. We call this groundwater recharge, especially in places with good soils, like much of the district has. If you looked at the soil and you cut it into one big slice, you would see two different distinct zones of soil. You'd have an area of soil that's mostly dry, that when it rains, that water percolates through. And then you'd have what we'd call the saturated zone. This is an area where the soil is wet persistently. And if you were to sort of blow up that image, if you look down here at the bottom of my screen, imagine a sponge with all of its pores filled. This is what groundwater is. It fills these pores and it slowly moves downhill underground towards our oceans. We call that division between that dry layer of soil and that saturated layer of soil the groundwater table. This is something persistent across our entire continent. It is dynamic. It responds to changes in weather patterns and season. And it is a resource that we tap into regularly. And what happens is throughout the landscape, that water is slowly, and we're talking inches an hour, working its way towards the lowest point in our landscape. Which is why if you do go to the lowest point, if you live in a neighborhood and walk out your door and keep walking downhill, eventually you're going to find a low spot. And if it's undeveloped, it might be pretty wet down there. And that's what happens is where that water hits the bottom of the landscape, it has nowhere else to go and it starts to emerge as spring seepage. Healthy streams reinforce that cycle. They process water. They flow as streams. They slowly vent water from the landscape. Unhealthy systems do the opposite, but achieve the same goals. If you were to pave over the landscape, you'd make it less able to infiltrate, and that would reduce the amount of water in our streams. Likewise, if you've ever been to, say, the eastern shore of Maryland and looked out at all of the big flat farms, a lot of those at one point or another were likely much wetter. And so by ditching or lowering channels relative to the landscape around them, you can accelerate the water leaving the landscape and drain them pretty effectively. So when it comes to DC, where did the streams go? Why did they disappear? Well, one of the things that we did is we filled over them. We literally piled dirt on top of them until we smothered them. And that groundwater table is now so far below the surface that that it doesn't interact with us today on the surface. So that's a pretty common thing. This is not a buried stream per se, but this is an example from the Library of Congress of kind of the scale of earthwork that happens with development. You know, our broader landscape is reflective of the way it looked today with our rolling hills, but the amount of material that we're able to move simply to facilitate construction of infrastructure and buildings is pretty jaw-dropping. The other thing, like I said before, is we paved over a lot of this landscape and we cut off the supply of water that slowly infiltrates and feeds those streams and wetlands. And so DC, for example, is somewhere, depending on your neighborhood, in the ballpark of 20 to 40% impervious, which is high. It's consistent with urban landscapes. And that means that our streams that used to be fed by rainfall slowly infiltrating and exfiltrating are more likely to be drier. And then, of course, as David pointed out, our biggest culprit, which is our sewer network, both storm drain and sanitary sewer. So when I say that, you know, I know David told the story from a somewhat tragic perspective, and there certainly is truth to that. But also, when the district was developed, conceived, established, some really brilliant engineers put every drop of water they could find to work and achieved really wonderful benefits for the community when they did it. First, clean streams were harnessed for renewable supply of drinking water. The Tiber Creek supplied the capital, for example. Next, they also put them to work to irrigate their farms. I know it's hard to imagine now, but so much of the city was agricultural land and fire control. Parts of the Tiber were diverted to sit in underground reservoirs in the event the capital were to experience a fire. But the most significant piece is putting them into sewers and taking the flowing water and using it as an engine to move human waste away from where we live. This is one of the greatest victories on record for the district and really changed the ability to be healthy in the city that we love. So this picture is amazing. This is Foundry Branch. If you've ever been to Glover Archbold Park, you might see this and wonder, what the heck is this big tunnel alongside the walking trail, actually underneath it? Well, the Foundry Branch sewer was one of the last interceptor-style sewers. It was installed in the early 20th century to facilitate development. It was a combined sewer. It took wastewater and stormwater and flowing spring water, put it in a giant tunnel and funneled it straight out to the Potomac. So that was really the last big system that we did that to. That pipe is still there today, by the way, and although we have since separated the sewers, the flowing stream that was once there is still in that pipe, which brings us to kind of this modern era. DC has maybe the most advanced wastewater treatment plant in the world at Blue Plains. It opened in 1937. Here's an aerial photo near the time of construction. This was paired with 1960s. This is sort of the start of the modern environmental movement. For example, the EPA was established in 1970. People didn't want to recreate, experience, or be around rivers that had waste in them. And so we started to see a government campaign to separate those sewers, to say, okay, we built this awesome wastewater plant. Let's send the wastewater there and keep the stormwater and the rainwater back out to the rivers. And so this program began, and it was a big success. Most of the sewers along the Potomac were separated, with wastewater flowing to Blue Plains and stormwater going into Rock Creek and out to the Potomac. I would say many of the sewers close to the Anacostia were similarly separated. However, as for the center of the district, everything shown in green here is still part of the combined system. Now, the combined system doesn't go out to the Anacostia anymore. It goes to Blue Plains, where both stormwater sewage is treated. But up until recently, there's limited capacity of that system. It would still overflow and still has potential for it. But DC Water has made a tremendous investment in expanding capacity to minimize that potential. A big step towards making the Anacostia swimmable again. So that's the background information. That's where the streams went. So let's start looking forward. What I hope you take away from that is we've done a lot, and a lot of things have changed, but a lot of these changes are not ancient history. They do not predate George Washington. A lot of them do not predate the 20th century. A lot of these are big changes were decisions we made recently to deal with those challenges. And so we have some new challenges. Now we're looking forward and trying to decide what we can do about it. So I wanted to show you one example, one case study here in the district of what we can do. So we're going to take one more look at the website here. And I want to tell you the story of Broad Branch in Northwest DC. Okay, on your map, here's Rock Creek flowing north to south. In blue, this line is the modern extent of Broad Branch. Let's take a look at what it looked like in the 1860s. It looked more like this, a much bigger network of streams integrated. It looks like a breathing lung running right through Chevy Chase. So where did it go? There's a large tunnel that runs underneath Nevada Avenue, and it outfalls here, downstream of some embassy land before going into Rock Creek. So you can see this big rectangular tunnel. So in 2014, DOEE coordinated with the National Park Service to say, hey, we've got some open land here right near where that giant pipe is. What can we do to restore some habitat in this area? And what they found were 2 watersheds that were currently draining into that pipe that didn't have to. And they commissioned a project to restore a surface pathway. Now this isn't earth-shattering, but 1,500 linear feet of stream and wetlands potential along the last segment of that tunnel. DOE also paired that with restoration of badly eroded streams that were contributing to this network. So here's some examples of what it looked like before. A lot of this was just an open field. And here's where one of the areas where we broke into one of those pipes and spilled water back out onto the surface. And here's some of the after. We've got incredibly lush landscape with water lilies, emergent plants, flowing streams. We've got a walking trail alongside it. I really commend DOEE because this is it's a real benefit to the neighborhood, the people who live there, and to the water resource itself. And of course, on the website, we have some sliders where you can learn more and a link to a video from National Geographic about this project. But sort of getting to the conclusion here, part of our study was mapping all these resources. The other part was saying, okay, help us find opportunities to do things like we did at Broad Branch. So first we looked at the outfall network, where all the storm drains end. There are about 500 in the district. And we decided to test a hypothesis that outfalls and pipe networks near the former location of those historic streams may be more likely to flow today. They may have that geology and groundwater hydrology that could support a resource back on the landscape. As it turns out, that assumption held up. It ended up being true. So we weren't going to be able to get to all 500 of these outfalls, but we took that hypothesis and we developed a search algorithm. We wrote a computer program to compare that with other factors like who owns the land, how much water drains to it, what's the underlying geology, things like that. And that allowed us to narrow the field from 500 down to 100 sites. And at that point, it was time to get our boots wet and send our teams out in the field. And we went and looked at all 100. We went to over 100 sites. We looked at each one. We investigated, are they flowing? Do they have potential to flow? Is there space to accommodate a project if we wanted to do that? Where would a restoration project fit into the modern city, into the landscape? What benefits would it bring? What challenges would it face? So we ranked all of those sites from best to worst, and we worked with DOEE to identify 4 sites for a concept design, so that if DOEE wishes to proceed with either those projects or a future project, they have some mapping, some preliminary data to support presenting it to public groups like you or funding organizations, and see if there's something to be done. So with that, I would like to ask Josh from DOEE to hop back on here and give some perspective. We were going to show a couple of these sites to you so that you could see kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so Sean put together 2 sites where we could daylight streams. And I want to say that was part of Strawn's work. DOEE is presently already looking at daylighting opportunities for Stickfoot Branch, which is in Ward 8 along Suitland Parkway. It outfalls into the Anacostia River at Poplar Point, but the very upper part of the watershed where we're doing a stream restoration project, we're going to be removing about 250 feet of pipe. Not a whole lot, but given the constraints around that site, that it's better than not doing it. And then in Fort DuPont Park, similar to what we have on the screen here, where Fort DuPont outfalls into the Anacostia River, a lot of Anacostia Park used to be tidal wetlands, and they were filled in the early 1900s, and it created Anacostia Park. But what Strawn did on this design, and similarly we're working at Fort DuPont, is how can we use some of that area that's maybe not used for recreation right now and daylight a stream and create wetlands where they once were historically, so that we can have the great water quality filtering features that wetlands have, the great habitat features that wetlands have, and then having a stream meander through those wetlands through Anacostia Park. So this one concept design that Strawn put together for Anacostia Park, the building in the center is Anacostia Rec Center. And you'll see there's the parking lot and tennis courts there, but it would be to daylight 2 stormwater outfall pipes that run underneath the park presently and outfall into the Anacostia River. And essentially we would be creating tidal wetlands where there's presently fields. And it's just a concept design. So it's something, obviously the Park Service owns that property. We would have to work with the property owner. The park is working on a sort of a visioning plan for the park as itself. So it's an aspirational project at this point. And then the second site that Strawn worked on out of the 4 that they worked on for us is Langston Golf Course. There were 2 streams that historically went through the site, where Kingman Lake, the northern part of Kingman Lake to the west of Kingman Lake. The northernmost stream sort of comes off the Arboretum property and then flows in a southeastern direction down towards the upper part of Kingman Lake. And then the other stream that was there historically was at the northeast corner of where Spingarn High School was. And Strawn's design shows the 2 streams sort of go through the golf course and then come out into Kingman Lake. We're actually already in discussions with the National Links Trust, who has the 50-year lease to manage Langston Golf Course, about the potential to daylight those streams through there. So this one is actually, we're still very early in this process, but this type of conceptual design is what we can present to property owners to help show them the opportunities that there are on their own properties to daylight streams. And in some ways, daylighting streams for the golf course can help them with some of the current problems that the piped stream network and the channelized streams have caused. And so they actually really like the idea of having a more natural stream flowing through the golf course.
All right, thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone who's still with us. We actually have most of you still here, and I know this is a long haul here. We just had so much we wanted to share. So I'm gonna close things up here with some final takeaways. First, I hope you can take away that our waterways have been dramatically altered in the last 250 years, most of it for good reason. And some of the most dramatic changes have happened in just the last 100 years. I think we showed 3 or 4 different configurations of the National Mall and tidal basin just today in this presentation, for example. With that in mind, many iconic features of the district are maybe not to your group, but to me, they're certainly more modern than I had initially thought of. And so this might be a little aspirational, but I would just reinforce that these alterations were made to serve the needs of the past, and we're not constrained by them. Those people were thinking really, really big. These were huge public works investments that solved big problems at the time. So we have a whole new set of challenges ahead. We're facing rising sea level. We're a city on the water, climate change, more intense storms, which are all things that healthy water resources are a big part of. So all I would ask is that us as a community, we don't know necessarily what the solutions are. I'm not advocating for necessarily one thing over the other, but let's just not be afraid to think big like they did back then and invest in a healthier and more resilient district. So last but not least, where can you learn more? We'll make sure that link is shared in the chat over and over again if it hasn't been already. I'll make sure Christine gets a copy of this presentation so that you can access these links as well. We have a short video summary of this project if you wanted to look at that or share it. There's also a feature on this project on WAMU or a long form version of that same interview on the DCS website. So it is a little after 7:30. Thank you again, everybody. Here is our contact information. We are happy to discuss or share more, but I do want to end it here. And I think that we are happy to sit around and take any questions.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing and fascinating. This is I don't have words. It's really wonderful. Does anyone have any quick questions? You can either take yourself off mute or you can type in the chat room, whichever is easier.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
I'm Dave Saylor. I live in the Chevy Chase part of DC, about half a block from the Broad Branch pipe, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't understand is, okay, there's a pipe down there that picks up the main stream, but are there feeder pipes, or what? How does that water get to the spot where it then gets into the pipe? You've done a great job, by the way, on daylighting down below. That looks terrific.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David. Thank you for the question. Yes, is the quick answer. Everywhere that you see curb and gutter, an inlet or a catch basin, or a grate in the roadway, along that whole Nevada Avenue corridor, and wider, 5-6 blocks surrounding, goes into smaller storm drains that go into that tunnel. Now, the other piece of this is when we looked at that groundwater table, a lot of these pipes are likely near or below that groundwater table. And a lot of these pipes are pretty old and aren't necessarily perfectly sealed at their joints. And so that's why a lot of these systems flow, is that water is sort of seeping into those pipes where it intercepts the groundwater table and then forming either a trickle or, in the case of Broad Branch, a much more robust flowing system coming out the end once you get to it.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
I put one in the chat. Obviously, two of the restorations that you mentioned, Stickfoot and Fort DuPont, would really drive the design of those parks, which are in development now. How can we get the Park Service to buy into doing those projects? It seems like they should be the sort of defining element for those park areas.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. With Fort DuPont and Stickfoot, both of those projects we're partnering with the Park Service. So they are, they're bought into those projects. Stickfoot, we've already completed the environmental assessment. And Fort DuPont will be starting the environmental assessment period for that work. The project's under design presently. But we will be starting the EA process relatively soon. But we've been partnering with the Park Service on them, and especially daylighting Fort DuPont, essentially between the railroad tracks and the river, is going to happen in some shape or form once we finish the compliance process. But like any urban,
Let me do the chat.
I can't read the chat.
Okay, let me.
Or I can move it.
Get rid.
there's also a big sanitary sewer line underneath that section that we have to design around too. So there are some tricks to do and things that we really need to be careful about. But we are working with the Park Service on a regular basis. So much so that I think I annoy them.
Good, keep annoying.
A number of people have mentioned Smith Spring. What is that in the chat room?
Oh, David, I might ask you to take this one. I'll get us started. Smith Spring is it is the headwaters, and when we say headwaters, we mean where the stream first sort of emerges of Tiber Creek. One of the more so. Imagine that graphic that looked kind of like a lung, a series of like branches of a tree. Each of those branches is fed by groundwater and spring flow. Smith Spring is in modern day Silver Spring, north of McMillan Reservoir, and was one of the more robust waterways that I believe was ultimately the one that was harnessed and redirected towards the capital for water supply. David, you want to correct me, chime in there?
That sounds perfect. Yeah, that sounds perfect.
I have a question on Foundry Creek.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so there's water in what remains of the creek from one section near Tenleytown, and then no water at all between Massachusetts and Tunlaw, or New Mexico. And then there's water once you get back into the park, say off New Mexico. I don't remember the street exactly. And then that water is actually next to that big pipe you showed a picture of. So what happened to the water where, you know, there's water and then there's no water and then there's water again? And is the water that is flowing next to the big pipe actually coming from another source, like a tributary? And there is a small tributary into Foundry Creek, just to the west of it.
Yes.
Do you know anything about this?
I do, and Josh
Okay.
does as well. Foundry Branch is one of the more interesting stories. Like I said, it is the last large combined sewer that the city invested in, as far as I know. And so, you know, it went in the early 20th century, and about 30 years later, after Blue Plains was installed, they installed another sewer in the valley to separate the two. They said, okay, we'll put the wastewater in another pipe and we'll send it to Blue Plains. But they left the stream in the big pipe. And so what you're seeing where you see areas that emerge, I mean, the stream wants to be there. It is the low point in the landscape, and still all of this surface drainage, some of which comes through like outfall channels or tributaries, like you said, runs down to that low point and sort of sits there and flows right alongside the pipe in certain areas. And then ultimately does go back into the pipe and where there's drainage adequate. The areas that are dry are just more adequately drained. So to kind of like put that in context of today, those separate sewers were installed in, let's say sometime around the 1950s. They're at the end of their useful life, and DC Water is currently confronting, well, we need to upgrade the sanitary sewer. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's certainly a good time to sort of think about what's happened in that valley. Josh, I don't know if you have anything to add there on that site in particular.
No, Joe, you described it really well. I mean, it is a engineering and ecological challenge, that stream valley, because there is so much stormwater that goes in there, so much stormwater that's in that pipe, plus the stream water, plus the sanitary sewer. So it's a really it's a complicated puzzle that sort of need to be unwound a little bit if there's real potential for that stream to flow the entire length ever again.
Would you let your dog drink from that stream? My dog loves the water.
My dog cannot be contained, but so I would say this: it is a separate sewer, and and that is better than, a system where the sewer is interacting directly with that water. I think it is reasonable to be cautious allowing your daughter to, your
My
dog,
My daughter now.
to swim in any waterway, particularly within 48 hours after rainfall. There's a lot of somewhat nasty stuff that gets picked up. Also, in valleys that have sanitary sewers running alongside them, DC Water does a really good job of cataloging and testing if there's any leakage. It does happen though. So if I were you, I would. I would allow my dog to go in there, but these are things to be mindful of,
Okay.
in a bigger context.
Thank you. This has been wonderful.
How
So
many CSOs still drain into Rock Creek?
I can't, I wish I could answer it with certainty. I can definitely direct you to someone who can. It's not zero. It is, I think it's in the ballpark of 2 or 3 systems. Josh, I don't know if you know off the top of your head the answer to that.
I don't know off the top of my head, and I will say one of the other things that we've come across, not just in Rock Creek but in other tributaries, whether through intent or negligence, is there are times where buildings are built, homes are built, and they tie their sewer into the wrong pipe, and that just happens. So there is, sewage and waterways. A lot of these pipes also, even we're in a separate system, the pipes are old and leaks happen. And so we'll see, if you start seeing gray water in a stream, that's probably because there's some type of sanitary leak into it.
I wish I'd turned this off 30 seconds ago.
I'm very near David Saylor, who asked the question earlier on. And I'm up Fessenden from Linnean Parks. And I always understood that the creek that feeds Linnean Park actually runs under Fessenden Street. Is anybody aware of that?
Yeah, I'm pulling up a map on my screen just so I can remember. I'm familiar with the site, very familiar with the site. And you're right, it was right near where we presented. So the short answer is sort of. Much like many of the other systems, the storm drain network runs under Fessenden, and it takes drainage off of Fessenden and Broad Branch Terrace and some of the other roads, 36th Street, and consolidates that runoff into pipes, and then it gets pretty low. So again, there could be some groundwater seepage into it, and then it ultimately emerges in Linnean Park. So I probably wouldn't visualize like a big flowing tunnel of water necessarily, but definitely there is a pipe network down there that does intercept some water and feeds the stream network in the park. Let's go to, I know Patricia, I know your hand has been up for quite a while. I wanted to make sure we didn't skip you.
This is a question about Rock Creek, sort of a 2-part question. Is the Soapstone Valley restoration project part of this? And also, does the report or on the website show the outflows into Rock Creek itself? I've just been told that there's one at the end of my street. That's still a combined one, and I'm just curious.
Yeah, Josh might be able to answer better, but I am aware of the projects, so I can speak a little bit to it. I do want to clarify that when we say there are still some combined sewers in the Rock Creek watershed, those sewers collect combined stormwater and wastewater and do send it to Blue Plains. It's only in isolated events. They don't dump directly into Rock Creek. However, what is possible is an overwhelming amount of rainfall could cause the system to overflow. Those are what we're most concerned about. The Soapstone project is not part of our scope with this effort. It is DC Water, similar to kind of what we talked about with Foundry Branch, is investigating how do we upgrade the sewer, make it sustainable over the long term. I know my company has had a little bit of work towards that project, but they've been looking at that for 15 years. And I do not know what the status of it is right now. Our project does not show the sewer network on the website, but you can certainly explore the valley on a number of different maps and see what the former stream network looked like surrounding it prior to the neighborhood development. So that's what I could offer you, but maybe Josh, if there's anywhere they could go for more information or resources.
Yeah, for Soapstone, I mean, I know DC Water completed all the environmental compliance and awarded the construction contract, but no work has commenced as far as I know. DOEE is not a part of that project. We do, DC Water and DOEE coordinate a lot in terms of if they have a sanitary sewer line that might be exposed in the stream valley, they want to work with us so that it's done in the most environmentally sensitive manner. One of the projects I mentioned earlier, Stickfoot Branch, it's a joint project where we're the lead, where we want to protect their sanitary sewer line in a more ecologically sensitive manner than might otherwise have happened. And so we do coordinate with them a lot, but Soapstone is one of the projects where we are not partnering. We're not part of that project. It's a DC Water project alone.
Right, Mike, the other part of my question is that do the maps show where tributaries to Rock Creek have been channelized? Because that's what I've been told, that the street in front of my house used to be a stream, and it goes,
What's your street?
Harvard,
I don't think
down to the back entrance to the zoo. There's a ford there.
They decide whether to daylight a stream or underground.
Yeah, we could look. I mean, the maps that Joe put together would show whether there was a stream there previously. What we might not know is whether there still is a stream there, or if it's been buried or piped somewhere into some other location. So I can't give you a 100% answer one way or the other.
But the maps show that.
Yeah,
show some of
it was
that.
historically there. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Let me just jump in because I know we're running out of time. If we can just go to Matt Simonson and also Marion Dombrowski, I think if we can answer their questions, then I fear we'll have to call it to an end. But go ahead, Matt.
Thanks. I have a delightfully parochial question, which is a lot of us on this call live near Broad Branch, and by its name, I assume it was once a pretty important waterway, and there's a road name for it. What trivia, either historical or hydrological, can you tell us about it, aside from the fact that a piece of it was recently daylighted?
Oh man, I have some speculation. Will you take gossip? Josh, you might remember this, but I had heard that the initial piping of that stream was related to a mother of somebody involved in Congress who was unhappy with, it may have been mosquitoes or drainage issues, and suddenly the funding appeared and the stream disappeared. I hate to put it that way because it's speculation. This is like total hearsay, but it was a major waterway, and it was a major effort to put that one underground. Yeah, I'm sure other people have even more stories. I'd invite you to check out there's a link to a National Geographic video on the website, and that has some other perspective on the project and where it sits as well. Okay, let's go to Marion.
Hey, I have a few questions. I'll try to ask them pretty quick. The stream in Langston, what's the name of that stream?
Oh, I don't know that it has a name. So, I mean, that's a really good question because some of the larger systems are named on maps. Some are named more than one time. But as far as I know, that one is unnamed. And maybe we should all name it once it comes back out.
Okay, yeah, they all need names. Too many streams are unnamed. And will Hickey Run be done at the same time, do you think?
Do I think it'll be the same time if we do daylighting at Langston?
Right.
Is that the question? No. Hickey's further down the road. The streams that would flow through Langston are much smaller streams, and I believe the plans to do, because we would want to coordinate it with the master planning of the redo of the golf course itself, which is on a faster timeline than Hickey Run is presently.
The reason I ask is because Hickey and Watts, as far as clogging up the Anacostia, they're probably the worst. I mean, the last time I was down there at a low tide, you could almost see the sandbars joining. And, you know, it'd be a shame to lose that part of the river. And I guess that kind of gets into what the criterion for selection of streams. Is it still expedience, or is there better, more, you know, compelling reason?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we look at, you know, from DOE's perspective, we look at a lot of what we're funded to do is to reduce stream bank erosion. And so we look at where stream bank erosion is really bad. And right now I'm working at Stickfoot, Fort DuPont, and some sort of large outfall gullies in Ward 7 as well. And per linear foot, they have some of the highest stream bank erosion in the district. And so that's what we're prioritizing. And we've done stream restoration on Watts Branch. And I think you pointed out in the chat that we did stream restoration at Springhouse Run, which is a tributary to Hickey. But Hickey is it's a big beast of a project. The drainage area into that stream is huge. And there's also a big, large sanitary sewer pipe that crosses over the stream at a really funky diagonal angle. So there are some challenges that Hickey presents that some of these other projects that DOE is moving forward on, those other projects just don't have a big sanitary sewer line over it that has been in bad shape in recent years.
Okay. Yeah.
And so if you want to say I'm scared of it, you can say I'm scared of it.
No, don't be, Josh, please. I'm going to die before that stream is done. And then the last thing, Watts, I know you all have spent so much time on Watts, but it's never passed water quality. It's never passed the standard. You know, upstream and, you know, the Capitol Heights area, downstream in the park, yeah, 0 times. I mean, some really surprisingly horrid streams have passed. You know, Quincy Run passed a couple times, you know, which is just shocking. But Watts, you know, it looks so good where it goes through Marvin Gaye Park by the recreation center. I monitor there, and I'm in that water all the time. Never, 0 times has it ever passed. So
yeah, and I think that's one of the tricky things, especially with Watts Branch or streams in general. Like, they don't care about political boundaries. So the district could, like, we did a 1.7 mile long restoration on Watts, which is sort of the area where you're referencing. But upstream of the district, it's in Maryland, and we have no control over what Maryland does. And then downstream of where we worked is on National Park Service land, where we didn't work either. And so we do have some of those challenges where some things are out of our control. It is a highly impervious watershed. When I made that reference to some people have connected their sewer pipes accidentally or intentionally to stormwater pipes, I know there's been issues of that out along Watts in the past. And I know DC Waters worked a few years ago to try to get rid of that. But there are a lot of challenges out at Watts. And so we did a good project out there. There's now, as of 2 weeks ago, 6 beaver dams along Watts Branch in Marvin Gaye Park.
Yay, they're helping. They're helping, right?
Exactly. What our engineers couldn't do, the beavers have decided to take on themselves. And, you know, it's great, but like, the beavers are great. And then all of a sudden we're getting complaints that big trees are starting to come down. And so there's a balancing act there too, where we basically had to go out and start fencing a whole bunch of trees so that these trees didn't fall onto private property or people along Watts. But the beavers being back in Watts is a good sign. It's a good thing.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for all the work you do. I just love it.
With that, thank you so much. I hear beavers are partial to cherry trees, so that's I don't know, that's a conflict there, I guess. But I'm in favor of the beavers. But anyway, thank you, Joe and David and Josh, for staying over and answering all these questions. This has been fantastic. The attendance has been great, so we're really pleased. If you're not a member of CHRS, consider joining. You can just go to our website, just go Google that. Couple dates again to remember. The photo contest is March 13th deadline. The walking tours, they'll be in March 26th and 27th. And then the house and garden tours will be on May 7th and 8th. But you can go to our website and find out more information about them.
Can you put the link in the chat?
It's just chrs.org for Capitol Hill Restoration Society, so chrs.org. So, terrific. Thank you so much. And everybody have a wonderful evening. And this has been great. I'll end it now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.